Great. Welcome everyone to our panel. Great to see lots of interest. So the title of our panel today is Reinventing Food: How Agritech Provides Solutions to Food Security. My name is Malte Clausen. I am a partner with Boston Consulting Group based in Copenhagen, Denmark. And I work with the food system on a daily basis, serving clients in the food and agriculture sector. And I have the honor to moderate this panel for today. So I'm just going to introduce our amazing panel here, and then give everyone a chance to properly tell a little bit about their own profile and what they work on. So we've got Rick Burton, Deputy Minister for the Ministry of Agriculture, Government of Saskatchewan of Canada. Then next to him we have Ahmad Padasene, Lead Environment and Climate for West and Central Africa for the International Fund for Agricultural Development. Dr. Angela Bedard-Haugen, Dean of College of Agriculture and Bioresources, also University of Saskatchewan. And finally, Dr. Melle Lenstra, the Agricultural Counselor to Egypt and Jordan, Kingdom of the Netherlands. So this is our very impressive panel. I'm hugely honored to be here with this impressive panel and to moderate this. So let's just have a round of introductions and learn a little bit more about the background and the work for each of our panelists. Rick, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mo. Just as a way of introduction, as you said, I'm the Deputy Minister for Agriculture in Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan is a western province in Canada. We're about 15 to 1,700 kilometers from the Port of Vancouver. We have a very large, well, I'll tell you, in terms of my background, I have worked in ministry for about 35 years, the last 6 as the Deputy Minister. And I am from a farm originally, have family members that farm. So I've seen a lot of change in the industry over the last couple decades in particular. And I want to spend just a minute or two talking about those. So in Saskatchewan, we have about 25 million hectares of agricultural productive land. About 18 million hectares of that is cropland. And every year that produces about 35 million tons of grains, oil seeds, and pulses. And we also have about 7.5 million hectares of rangeland in our province. So native grass and tame forage. And that helps support about 1.1 million cattle herd, about 30% of Canada's cattle herd. Saskatchewan's a major exporter. It's a world leader and exporter of durum wheat, canola, canola oil, canola seed, canola meal, as well as lentils and peas and a number of other commodities, and we're a major player in wheat exports as well. So I just want to talk real briefly about some things I've seen in terms of changes in practices over the last couple decades. The first is the focus on soil health in Saskatchewan, move to zero till or minimum till, and that has resulted in improved organic matter in the soil. It's also resulted in better nutrient and water efficiency, and as a result, we're seeing our soils go from emitters to sequestering over 12 million tons a year of carbon in our soils. Other practices I just want to touch on briefly is our diversified crop mix reduces disease pressures, gives opportunities for producers, and we've seen the development of pulses, who went from a couple thousand hectares in 1990 to where it's over 2.5 million hectares today annually, and that reduces our carbon footprint by over 2 million tons a year as well, because of less fertilizer needed for pulses. And then the third thing is, and we'll talk more in the question area, but is really the uptake of new technologies, whether it's precision ag, digital decision making, and what impact that's had on reducing our climate footprint or environmental footprint, and also it's having a big impact on increasing our productivity. So when I said we are producing about 35 million tons a year, We have a goal to increase that to 45 million tons by 2030, and I think we can achieve that by continuing on this path that we're on.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Amat Patesen. So I work with the International Fund for Agricultural Development based in Abidjan. And we are mainly focused on smallholder farmers in Africa and in across the world in general. So this year, this COP is the Africa COP. As you all know, Africa is contributing to less than 4% of the global emission. And our main narrative is adaptation. So although we focus on energy for agriculture, but most of our work is adaptation of smallholder farmers and how can we transition towards low emission and climate resilient agriculture in Africa in general, particularly in the Sahel. Why? Because it's the region that has contributed less to the global emission but suffered the most. It's also a region where you have young people, a bulk of young people looking for opportunities, and agriculture can be this main source of job creation for youth, but also for women. So in IFAD, our main work is lending resources to governments, but also providing grants and highly concessional. Most of these communities that work on smallholder agriculture in the rural areas, they don't really have those capacity to attract resources. So we work with government, with the private sector, through public and private partnership to bring at the center of our work adaptation. And in the region, over the past years, I've been going on several missions. Today we are here talking at the COP. But this next week, you will be on the ground in the most remote area, whether it is in Zander in Niger, or Mongo in Chad, or somewhere, Ségou in Mali, or in the Congo Basin. You always meet young communities, young people, they're asking, we want financing to do business. So how do we access this? And when you say, look, we are working with your government, they say, we don't want those government projects. We directly get the financing simplest way, quick, fast, not the bureaucracy of having all these project management unit in the village where it's quite complex. And recently we came up with an idea to put an inclusive green finance initiative, which the main objective is, as a cooperative, as a young led enterprises, MSMEs, or as a farmers association, you can go directly into a local bank, agricultural bank, or a microfinance institution and get resources and implement your project. But you can only implement adaptation or mitigation intervention. So to get to that result, we partner with the Green Climate Fund to provide us financing at 0% interest rate. We always want to support them, but we say grant and always aid is not good. It has to be a loan. But the loan in the Africa region is extremely, extremely expensive. In Nigeria, for instance, if you take a loan there, it's almost 24%. So in Ghana, the same. In other regions, it's 17%. So how can you, as a poor, borrow money and pay back 20% and interest rate? And the period of repayment is very short. After 2 months, you have to pay back after the rainy season. So this is why we got those resources from the Green Climate Fund at 0% interest rate, rechannel it to the local banks, and the local banks on lending to smallholder farmers at 0%. They can do a blending, but at the end of the day, the objective is we cut down those interest rates at the lowest possible, so for a specific smallholder farmers in a group. And this is a program which has started with a pilot of $10 million, and now we are at $500 million. Now, to make that project successful, we have set up a technical assistance facility. We all know that those banks, they don't have the capacity. We all know that these smallholder farmers, they don't have the capacity. Then if you bring money, you need a technical assistance pillar. And that technical assistance pillar will help smallholder farmers, the one that we meet on the ground, to design bankable projects that can go to those local financial institutions, and those projects are financed, implemented, and there is return of investment, whether it is on climate resilient seed varieties or warehouse that are climate resilient with a certain, or roads or insurance, any kind of type of eligible activities can be financed with those one. But at the end, just to conclude, the financial institution we are working with will be also green finance and financial institution, because at the end of the day, the moment they get the money, they will start now working on greening their own process, but at the same time also blended those resources with this one. So this is one of an concrete example of financial models which we've put in place to support agri value chain, but also the food system in the area of the Green Great Wall countries and in the Sahel in general. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Angela Bedard-Hahn. I'm the Dean of the College of Agriculture and Bioresources. And so the College of Agriculture and Bioresources at the University of Saskatchewan is one of the oldest colleges at that university, but relative, if we put that in context, that means it's just over 110 years old in terms of its age. But it's always been a really essential part of the province of Saskatchewan in terms of the agricultural mission and successes that Rick was highlighting earlier. So my own background, I was born and raised in Saskatchewan. Like Rick, I grew up on a farm in Saskatchewan. My academic background is a soil scientist, and throughout my research career, the 20 years that I've been doing soil science, I have really been focused on research at that interface in terms of that relationship between agriculture and environment. So my earliest work was looking at how water movement through soils influences some of the key properties and processes that are occurring within there. And I've also done extensive work, in particular, looking at greenhouse gas emissions and their management within those types of agricultural landscapes and carbon sequestration. And I'll talk more about that in a little bit. Our college has very much always been focused on being not the ivory tower kind of university. So in the earliest days of the University of Saskatchewan, our college actually had what they called the Better Farming Train. And so in the 1910s, 1920s, there was actually professors would get on a train and go across the province and share the latest developments in farming practices with the folks that were just getting started in agriculture in that area. And so that ethos has really continued insofar as all of our research now continues to be very closely integrated with the producers of Saskatchewan and of the prairies, as well as some of our international partners that we have as well. And so that close relationship, that research ecosystem that brings together universities, the producers, various aspects of the ag sector in Saskatchewan, as well as our key partners in provincial and federal government, are an important part of how we support agriculture and how we support the environment, the effort to make sure that agriculture is part of nature-based climate solutions. So I'll leave it there and come back when we've got more questions.
Well, I'm from the Netherlands. I'm representing the Dutch Ministry of Agriculture, Nature and Food Quality, part of a diplomatic network of about 40 agricultural councillors in 60 countries. For a long time as the Netherlands, we were priding ourselves on, as a tiny country, being the second agricultural exporter after the US in terms of value. At the same time, domestically, we're now struggling with seeing or having overshot the planetary boundaries of our agricultural production system. And politically and societally, there is a strong push on us as government, on our farmers, that it can't be agribusiness as usual. We got the position that we had and the boasting position as second agricultural exporter through innovation and entrepreneurship. We didn't have the idea that government was the custodian of all issues and all problems, yet government had to work with the private sector, with knowledge institutions like Wageningen University and Research, and with civil society, to be able to find and co-create and co-innovate those solutions that make a local sense. But also internationally, we used to be interested as agricultural counselors in promoting our export. Now we look at opportunities to co-create those solutions that will lead to more future-proof agriculture. COP is a great opportunity to share ideas, to share the sense of urgency about what the planet needs, the people needs, and what is profitable at the same time, because it's also important. The Dubai Expo for us was a great opportunity for Dutch companies to share some technological practices, and we also hope that in the run-up to COP28, focusing on climate-smart agriculture, there will be some opportunities for that. Thank you.
Much. Great, great introduction from all of you, and very interesting to hear some of these common themes that you all touch upon. Of course, we talk about decarbonization, we talk about soil health, we talk about working with the private sector, making sure that it is financially viable, either through lending programs or through entrepreneurship and innovation, and we talked about export. The export angle as well was a common theme here. So I think many topics that I would like to dig into here in our limited time. I'll just start with Ahmad. In the example you gave with your lending program, you mentioned both these grants or other types of instruments that you have to support local farmers. As I understood it, it was primarily focused on it was like green lending, so it was mitigation or adaptation related. But I guess there's also just a huge topic around food security. So how do you balance that? Does it have to always be the lending? Does it have to always be focused on, you could call it green lending, or could it just be plain old, food on the table? Like, how do we ensure food security?
Thank you. It's a very good question. And in the Africa region and in all countries we work, the initial investment of IFAD, it's development. So we've been doing like green normal lending, like conventional lending. But what we discovered is whenever you have drought, you have floods, disease, pest, everything is gone. If there is no agricultural insurance, so then the production is gone, and unfortunately they have to wait for aid. So at the end of the day, we've been providing lending for many years. It's also the case of the World Bank, IFC, and the other organization in the region. However, when you look at adaptation as a public good, because that's where we really need to look at adaptation. It's not like the incremental cost which you need to add on the development lending is maybe 10% or maybe 15%. For instance, a climate resilient road in Sierra Leone will make a big difference if you produce and then you are able to access to the market. But if that normal road, which has been financed by just normal development finance, but you did not really add a 1 million additional one to put a drainage system, a culvert, or a certain materials that are resilient to the floods, then you can produce, but unfortunately, after you will get post-harvest losses because you can't get to the market. The road is completely destroyed during the rainy season. So bringing green finance will push the other side of the demand to become green. And if you are green, it has an extra cost, but we are looking at long terms. And the long term is the seeds, the varieties on rice production value chain. Normal rice value chain in some certain ecosystem will give you maybe 2 tons per hectare. Whereas if you come with Nerica 19, which costs more, then you will get like 5-6 tons per hectare, and you don't necessarily need to have a certain amount of rainfall or irrigation in terms of volume. And this extra cost, which is an adaptation good, will also help in terms of return of investment. So at the end of the day, we need now to get that financing bigger, so at least the cost became lower, and then the green finance became like at the same cost as a normal conventional development finance.
Yes. And just very briefly, can you give like a concrete example of a successful use of those funds from some of these small or local farmers? Like just one example to make it very clear for everyone, like how are those funds used and how does it make sense in the local community and the economy?
All right. So if you take, for instance, a cooperative, we have some example of cooperatives that work, like for instance in Côte d'Ivoire, where I'm based, and we've been working with them. And they work on cocoa. You know, the country is the largest producer of cocoa in the world. But still, those smallholder farmers that produce the cocoa, they are poor. And unfortunately, if the cocoa is not working well, they still continue to chop the forest because they want to get additional resources. Unfortunately, cocoa cannot grow without the forest, the shade. So at the same time, they need to sell the wood and so on. So there is a problem between. So sustainable cocoa production, from our perspective, which we support, is a kind of a certified production where there is no child labor, where you are not deforesting, but where you are getting resources that will help you to get the resilient seeds that can mix and to a low shade and produce more. Second, also, if you get the cocoa, the whole processing system up to the port for the export, so that processing system has also some warehouses, facilities, where the ventilation system is done in a way, or the orientation to have some light, so at least you can do it in a way that you are not going to have post-harvest losses. And this investment along the value chain from the production up to the port to the export, integrating those sustainability features. And those sustainabilities has cost. And that cost is the money we are deploying. And some of those cocoa organizations, when now they are certified, they get an extra amount paid by the buyers, and tomorrow they can build a house. So you can go in those communities where, like, you know, the certified cocoa production, because you are green, they are receiving an extra amount paid by those who are buying, so they can build a health center, some schools, and this is also contributing. The good business you are doing at the production and getting return on investment is helping you also to do social development aspects. So these are a concrete example in a country which we invest in, particularly on a cocoa production sector.
Great, thank you for sharing that example. Then I wanted to go into the topic of soil health, which was touched upon by both Angela and Rick. And I'd actually like to get your perspective from both of you on this topic, because often in the business world where I come from, we get this question: is it really possible to drive up yields while at the same time drive down carbon emissions? And you know, there's a reason we use fertilizers. There's a reason we use tilling practices. And so when we go towards reduction in fertilizer use and reduction in or low till or no till practices, don't we have like a fundamental conflict between yield and sustainability? Or what's the in your experience, what is your perspective on that?
Thanks, and great question. And you know, from Saskatchewan, we're not seeing that conflict. We're actually seeing that the two go hand in hand: productivity and sustainability. And so, just as you know, as I mentioned, that the move towards no-till and zero-till, it improves soil health over time, increases organic matter, makes nutrient efficiency and water efficiency. It improves them, and so that's one thing. The other is the move to what's called 4R practices, or nutrient management practices, making sure you're applying the right product, the right time, with the right placement, and you know, this move to the 4Rs has really you're able to take advantage of that through precision agriculture instruments that we now have access to. And so our direct seeders that can place the seed and fertilizer in exact right spots to maximize the benefits from the variety that they're putting, and the nutrients that you're putting in the soil, and so that they're being uptaken by the crop and not gassed off into the air. So we're seeing that the two go hand in hand. Just want to share some measurements that we've been doing. We've undertaken a study through the Global Institute for Food Security at the University of Saskatchewan, and the results of that study are going to be out in the next month. But the early indications from that study are very much that wheat and canola produced in Canada is a 50% lower carbon footprint than our number of our competitors. And in Saskatchewan, it's a 60% lower carbon footprint. And that is primarily a result of the agriculture practices that are being undertaken there, including minimal till. And when you talk about peas, and I talked a little bit about pulses, but on dry peas, for instance, the carbon footprint is over 80% reduced across Canada relative to our competitors. And in Saskatchewan, it's greater than 95%. So significant gains. I think we've got lots to do on measurement and understanding how each of the practices actually influence that sustainability or environmental outcomes. And so maybe I should let the scientist talk a little bit more about what she's seeing.
Great. Well, thanks, Rick. And so I just would echo that key piece in terms of it doesn't have to be a trade-off. It is a win-win. And so when we're talking about increasing the amount of plant residues that are going back into our soil because of those conservation tillage practices, basically by increasing the soil organic matter, you're making the soil more like a sponge. It can hold on to those nutrients. And in the case of areas like ours, where it's actually a semi-arid climate, it allows you to hold on to water as well. And so it really does allow you to need less inputs in the longer run because you're basically making the soil healthier. And the other piece that we've got more and more tools to measure now is looking at the microbial community, and that a healthy soil microbial community it's one of the primary indicators of soil health. And so through those cropping rotations that Rick was talking about earlier, combined with the conservation tillage approach, you are seeing great increases in terms of both the microbial biomass and the microbial diversity. And so what that gives you is a system that is more robust and as well as more resilient and resistant to disease pressures. And so, as Rick was mentioning, though, one of the key things that we need in order to be able to, and that we're really working on building up in Saskatchewan, bearing in mind that it's sort of the opposite of the Netherlands, it's a very large area. I quip that the soil, there's more soil scientists per square kilometer in the Netherlands than almost anywhere. But soil's powerhouse, really. But in terms of our ability to characterize the Saskatchewan landscape and the prairie landscape, we need to get detailed baseline measurements, and so we have some of that, and we're expanding on that now. We've got a very large project that's just recently been funded by the Provincial Ministry of Agriculture, looking specifically at carbon stocks that are associated with that large area of grassland and forage lands that Rick was talking about. And we also have a lot of work looking at that landscape scale relationship between carbon and within the cultivated landscapes as well. So looking at how carbon is distributed across the landscape, and capturing that information at that scale then allows us to feed that data, that fundamental understanding of the soil landscape, into those precision agriculture management tools that Rick was talking about, so that we can make more informed decisions about how much fertilizer we apply, where and when, and what are some of the risks and benefits of different timing. And so that all of that data comes together and feeds into the technology associated with precision agriculture.
So just to make sure I understand here, if we are to increase the use of these more sustainable farming practices and spread the word and spread the practices, is it a matter of just knowledge sharing and best practice sharing, or is it the precision fermentation and the precision farming and the digital farming tools that is kind of like the key enabler, or what? If you were to pinpoint one or two things that would need to happen in order for us to bring this to a larger scale, what would it be?
Maybe I'll start and Angela can add on. But I think there's a number of things. So there is the extension component that you talked about, building awareness of the impact of these practices. There's the measurement component, so we understand what the impacts are of various practices in various regions, because it differs by region. There's also the support for science-based decision-making and science-based understanding of, at a global perspective of what our policies have and how they're impacting, whether it's trade flows or environmental outcomes in other regions. So, you know, standing up for farmers and ensuring that they have as many of the tools in the toolbox that they have is important. I think market efficiency is another thing, and you know, we talked about the ability for whether it's producers to get paid for or to get some benefits back for some of their for good environmental outcomes. You know, governments can play a role in helping the markets develop and market efficiency. And then the last thing I'll just mention is really debottlenecking the supply chains on both ends. Right, farmers get a lot of imports for their crops, but we also export our commodities or our processed crops at the end of the day. And so where we can debottleneck that supply chain, it reduces the carbon footprint overall for the products. So I'll maybe let Angela speak now.
Sure. So just to pick up on that piece in terms of your conservation agriculture, do you need to have the precision agriculture piece? The short answer is no, because we were doing conservation and tillage for over 20 years before we really started doing the deeper dive into the precision agriculture applications. As the cost of that technology came down, that's when we started to really see the increase in adoption and our ability to tweak that. The equipment was available for us to really tweak that application, and the databases were available for us to really understand the underlying drivers of variability. But certainly the conservation tillage piece was, we were seeing great success in terms of impacts of that back in the 80s, and we were not doing a whole lot of precision ag work at that time. So it's a win-win all by itself.
Great. Well, thank you for shedding some light on what would be required to scale these good practices. Moving on to the Netherlands, I'm very curious to learn a little bit more about you could say the Dutch success story in agriculture, because coming from Denmark, we often talk about what's happening in the Netherlands. Of course, in Denmark we see ourselves as an agricultural country with a rich agricultural history, but when you actually look at the figures, when you look at like the pure export numbers that the Netherlands is able to achieve compared to Denmark, I'm still having a hard time actually understanding, because it's like it's a number of a factor of 3 or 4 or something more productive what's happening right now in the Netherlands, just in terms of value generated in that system. So I'm curious to just learn what's behind that, maybe even from like a historical or sociological perspective. Like what is it that has made the Netherlands such an innovative force, at least on the European continent, and what's the key to success, and what's to learn from other European countries?
Well, it's what we call the Dutch Diamond Corporation, private sector, public sector, civil society, and knowledge institutes. It's innovation and entrepreneurship. It's working with farmers and their innovative capacity. It's a problem-solving way of working. In Egypt, we see that our Egyptian friends, their agriculture is struggling from challenges, and we try to see where there are opportunities for the Dutch diamond to meet their Egyptian peers, to find those local solutions that make sense within the local context. Now, in some cases, that means high-tech agriculture. In Dubai, for instance, the Dutch private sector, working with the Emirati government, Abu Dhabi as well. There are very interesting high-tech greenhouse opportunities. But it's not just technology by itself. It's the combination of craftsmanship, nature-based solutions, and appropriate technology. Technology that makes sense in the local context. Now, if we're talking about sustainability, then it's also very important to have that conversation about the carbon footprint, about the water footprint, about the impact on biodiversity. It's important to have the conversation with society, with NGOs, and having, as you said, the science-based policy discussion, but also the interest-based policy discussion. If society wants something different from agriculture, there are going to be trade-offs, and that is what we're facing in the Netherlands now. There's too much production of animal manure because we're a very export-oriented sector. That is wreaking havoc on biodiversity, and our society says we don't want that anymore. Well, if that is the case, those trade-offs are going to have to be dealt with. That makes it a public, a political problem, or as we'd rather see, a political opportunity. And the how to solve those issues, those are knowledge questions, knowledge-intensive questions that we as government can't solve by ourselves. So it's the dialogue within the Dutch Diamond, in our case, that we need. But in the case of the Côte d'Ivoire cocoa sector, trade-offs have a different form, different shape. So we have Dutch NGOs like Solidaridad working with lead firms that are engaging on social enterprise, like Tony Chocoloni, for instance, or Mars in another case, to really find those opportunities that make sense for local farmers. But it's very important that we put farmers' interests and incentives first, but also look at the consumption side. A large part of the problem of our food system is because our consumptive practices, our desire to eat ever more meat, to eat ever more processed foods. We as society, we as consumers have to think, what does that mean? But also, those are conversations that government also have opportunities to ask questions about. In the Netherlands, we're considering and struggling with the idea, how do we work on true pricing in agriculture? How do we make sure that consumers pay the true price of our consumptive practices, also on the ecology? In the UK, for instance, from a nutrition perspective, they've started working with sugar taxes. There are some interesting evidence on what that means for consumptive practices. For sustainability, there are discussions in the Netherlands about a meat tax, whether meat should be have higher VAT and healthy vegetables a lower VAT. We're not there yet because this is politically sensitive, because such decisions have impact on people and on electorates. But these are the type of conversations that we have. For every choice we make, there's trade-offs, and we have to be explicit about the pros and cons of all that.
Just to follow up actually on that, Dr. Melle, these very politically sensitive topics, like for example, dietary habits, dietary culture, how much meat and dairy should we be consuming? Like this is, I think, in most Western countries, this is a political topic. It's a hot topic, a lot of emotions, a lot of controversy, even when we get into that topic. What's like, just in your perspective, what's the right way to approach it? If we are going to transition towards a more, let's say, plant-based food system, or with a less use of animal-based products, is first of all, is that a stated objective for the Dutch government? And if so, like what is a good way to do it, where you do it in a respectful way, where you bring everyone on board and you don't create unnecessary controversy?
To be very frank, I'm not sure that government is the one who has all the answers. We should be responsive to what is happening in the market and what is happening in society. And these decisions about sustainable consumption, or these discussions about sustainable consumptions, they are not just something in the West, because also through global value chains, this is also affecting, for instance, a producer country like Côte d'Ivoire, but also for Egypt as a producer of fresh produce to the European market. to be able to sustain those value chains, it's very important to know what the consumer wants. And the consumer is becoming more critical about water footprint and carbon footprint. So what we can do as government is listen, facilitate discussions, fund research to find those answers and to help us make sense of what is happening. And like that, we are working in this complex food system, and we're making sure that everyone takes their role, but it's an informed decision, and it's also very clear where the interest lies and what the trade-offs are.
Thank you.
If I could just add on to that just briefly, I just wanted to emphasize that we have to really be looking at that on a regional basis, I think, because certainly I've heard some wonderful presentations this week, but also just thinking about the Saskatchewan experience. We have a huge area of land where actually the best way to produce food on it is to feed the grass to animals first, right? So we can't eat the things that can grow there, and we have a lot of land that is just simply not suitable for annual crop production for soil health reasons. If we were to till it up, it would end up just blowing away. But we can use grazing practices to convert that biomass, to convert that sun's energy into carbon that is in the plants, and then the cows can eat that and convert that into energy that humans can consume. And the same thing, there are byproducts of some of the processing, feed processing, or plant-based protein even, for example. There are byproducts of that processing that, again, we can feed to animals and then convert that into animal-based protein. So I've heard people quip that actually all protein is plant-based protein. It's just whether it goes through an animal before we consume it. And so just keeping in mind that both the differences in terms of different animal production practices, they're not all created equally, and certainly in some regions, actually that conversion of plant-based plants to animal protein makes a lot of sense if we want to make maximum use of our land base.
Yes. So sensitivity towards the regional context. Thank you. I think we have time for one more question, or just time for some concluding remarks. I'm getting concluding remarks here, so I would just like to thank all of you. It's been really wonderful to hear your experiences and your sharing of knowledge. It was really great for me to learn. Obviously, you have very different roles in the agricultural system, so it was really interesting to see how there are some common themes and also different perspectives. So thank you all for this wonderful debate.